Hello, Run It Once. This is Zach Freeman. I'm coming back for part 2 of PLO8 series. I'm picking up where I left, and I'll be doing mostly gameplay this part. We have Ace-3, Deuce-6 in the small blind, and we defend. A strong hand, but a hand that I'm not looking at a 3-bet, particularly since the pre-flop raiser was under the gun. But even had he been in later position, I'm looking for this hand to go multi-way. The reason for that is it doesn't have an incredible amount of high potential, and when it does flop good for high, it's going to be in the form of wheel wraps that are going to be making straights, and the wraps are going to be able to be played pretty aggressively. And also, when we do make the straight, it's going to be a hand that's going to hold up against multiple players fairly often. So we are encouraging multi-way action because we can scoop a bigger pot. Another thing is the times that it doesn't make a good high hand, it will often make the nut low. And any time that we have the nuts for a one-way hand, we want to encourage as many players in the pot as possible because we're only going to be getting half the pot. But if we get the half the pot of a 4-way pot, that's a really good result. If we get half the pot of a heads-up pot, that doesn't net us any profit. So I'll move on to the gameplay. Here, we check to the pre-flop raiser, and he checks back. On the turn, I don't see any reason for betting again. And the reason is we lose to pretty much every ace, and we lose to a jack. The only hand we protect against by betting is flush draws and better low draws. But we do have a strong low draw, so the chances of somebody having a better low draw are not very high. And we do well by letting somebody bluff with a weak holding, perhaps like a flush draw and a worse low draw. And we really prefer not betting and getting raised because we do have equity with our Deuce-6. So we go ahead and check call. He bets full pot. We do brick the river, and we're just hoping for it to go to check. There are some draws that he has that may have missed, both low draws and high draws. But now we see, and we could consider a hero call for sure, but we see he only bets 1/4 pot on the river, and we're getting really good odds. Our ace definitely could be good, and if we're folding an ace every time here, we're definitely exploitable to this bet. However, we will have better a decent amount of the time. And not only that, but in my experience, when you see the full pot size bet on the turn when the low draw is present, and then a really small bet on the river, it looks like to me that he was trying to get value and protect against the low draw. And then on the river, he realizes correctly that most of our high hands were going to be leading the turn, and we're stuck with a range of missed lows on the river. And so he's either trying to get some thin value, well, not thin value, but trying to get called lightly, or try to get us to spaz out by raising with a missed low draw. And so I go ahead and make a fold there. On table 1, we'll have an open if folded to us. We flop quite well with trips, and my default's just going to be to bet here. I don't really like any other option. We want to, in this game, since a lot of our range is high-low hands, well, particularly ace with low cards, just a naked queen is going to call. And I bring that up just because in PLO, if you just had a naked queen here with no backup, you might even fold flop or just peel very reluctantly. But in high-low, just having a queen here is strong enough to make a slam dunk call on the flop at least. And another point to bring up is, had the flop been slightly different, had the flop been a 10-10-7 instead of 10-10 queen, that's a hand that we can check back sometimes. And we do that because with 10-10-7 on the turn, any low card that comes, there's a potential low draw now, and we can pick up a wide array of low draws that, well, our opponent can pick up a wide array of low draws that we can get value from. And so since we're going to be getting a lot of folds anyways on, if we bet flop on 10-10-7, it's a nice option sometimes to delay our bet and delay our value to once they have some hands that are drawing pretty slim, yet will call us down. Table 2, we have a hand similar to the last one we played on table 2, where we have a very strong hand for low only, but this hand is even weaker for high, given that we have no suits. And in a loose game, I will still opt to just raise preflop because we're going to get multi-way action anyways. However, if the game is not playing particularly loose, then limping becomes a nice option. And limping in general in other flop games, especially big bet, is usually discouraged. But in this game, due to its split pot nature, there's certain hands, like the ones we mentioned, where you're going to be flopping strong, but for only one end of the pot often. And they're hands that are pretty flop dependent that that limping works out nicely. And you might worry that by limping, we're going to be having our hand range face up a little bit and we'll be unbalanced, given that we'll have hands that don't have good suit connectivity or high cards with them. But that's not the case because the other type of hands that we can limp are high-only hands. So our opponents may know that we have a hand that doesn't go both ways as much, but hands like King, Queen, Jack 10, King, King, Jack, Jack, things like that, that we encourage multi-way action because, once again, when we do make our hand, it's going to be strong enough that it's going to hold up against the field in the form of full houses, flushes, straights. But at the same time, we want to get in for a minimal investment because particularly the high-only hands, they're only going to flop really well on the minority of flops where there's only high cards out. Now on table 1, this hand is much stronger, especially for high. We do have the ace deuce, but high card potential with it, so we want to just build the pot. And player 3 calls off his stack. We flop pretty much nothing with a dry side pot. I'm going to be just checking and hoping to turn some equity and win at showdown, but I don't see much benefit of betting. Now on table 2, we flop quite well. We flop bottom 2 with nut low draw, and in many spots, any 2 pair with nut low draw is going to be a hand that's strong enough to be playing very aggressively on the flop. But in this particular spot, nobody raised pre-flop. It's a recurring theme that we mentioned from part 1. So we can discount a lot of low draws, a lot of strong low draws. And we have the big blind leading into the field. So he has a stronger range than he would in other spots. Now, given that he doesn't have a lot of strong low draws, that means that we can skew his leading range to mostly high hands. If his range is skewed towards high hands, then our bottom 2 pair is fairly dominated for high. It still has some equity if he has queen plus draw or things like that. But for the most part, we're not going to overtake his high hand that often. So we're just going to want to flat, keep the pot smaller, and also encourage some weaker low draws to call behind us. Now, we catch the worst turn in the deck, and in fact, I don't think there's another turn worse than this. And on this particular turn, I think we actually need to fold. I don't like the call. And I believe I would be calling every other turn and raising some, obviously. If we made any low draw, I would be raising it, especially if we had a low club. That'd be a hand, that would be a card that we could play aggressively because we can get him off lower flushes or sets that he opted to bet. But most of the time, if he has a set, he's going to be checking to us, and we can just barrel him off the set. However, I don't like the turn call. We brick river, and we fold. Table 2, we have a marginal high-only hand, and if there's a small raise pre-flop, I will call. But what you want to be careful about with the high-only hands is if you start playing marginal hands that are, decent like this one, but not great, your VPIP's going to start creeping up too high. And you need to have, for a high-only hand, you need it to be really high quality, because when you do flop a high-only hand or a high-only draw, you want it to be really good such that you're going to have redraws. It's going to hold up the maximum amount of time, because it's already a rarity that we do flop well enough to go with a high-only hand, excuse me. On table 1, it's a limp pot, and we flop bottom pair and third nut low draw. I make a speculative peel, which I think is close. It's okay, given that he's a short stack. There's not much reverse implied odds. We can spike 2 pair and second nut low on like a 7. An 8 is probably pretty good for us. A deuce is great, giving us nut low and some high potential as well. But on a brick river like a jack, our chances of scooping the pot are highly diminished, and go ahead and check fold. On table 2, another marginal hand, but worth defending towards from the button's min raise. We flop bottom 2 and a backdoor low draw. He c-bets about half pot, and we call. And we're done with the hand once we get check raised here. It was already a speculative call on the flop. So on table 2 here, we have a new type of hand category that we haven't talked about much. And I like to call these ace hunter hands. In my opinion, they're a good analogy to them are small pairs and no limit hold'em. Instead of set mining to make trips, you're mining for an ace. And your hand becomes very strong when you flop an ace. The reason for that is when we flop an ace, at minimum, we have nut low draw, and it's uncounterfeitable. If the ace comes with any other low card, then we flop the nut low draw uncounterfeitable. If we flop an ace with a 5 with this particular hand, we'll have an extremely strong hand, which will be uncounterfeitable nut low draw with a wheel wrap, a hand that we're happy to put a lot of action in with. Now, not all of these ace hunter hands are created equal. The minimum requirement is that we have deuce 3. Deuce 3-4 is ideal. Deuce 3-5 works as well. But when you start moving up to a hand like deuce 4-5, which doesn't look much different, it diminishes its value quite a bit. The reason is if we're already so dependent on the flop containing an ace, when we have deuce 4-5 and the ace comes, let's say it's ace king 7, we flop second nut low draw instead of nut low draw, which is a big difference. And we are already putting a requirement that we're only continuing when aces flop anyways. So for us to put such a requirement on it and then still not have the nut draw, it makes the hand probably not worth playing in most cases. It's a hand that I like to limp as well, so it's in that category of those ace deuce 3-5 or ace deuce 3-7 type hands with no suits, etc. Here in this spot, we don't flop the ace, but it's a limped pot. Nobody raises pre-flop, and once again, the recurring theme, we can discount how many ace 3 and ace deuce combos they have. We have a 3 in our hand, which further reduces it. So our 3-4 low draw is good here unless somebody has ace 3 or ace 4. We do have a deuce for a little bit of high potential, and I'm going to bet here and expect to get some folds. When called, we'll be facing a range of some low draws that are better than ours, and our deuce will occasionally win at showdown unimproved or improved to a better high hand.